This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Sudan's President El Bashir dissolves government and declares a state of emergency. Election weekend, voting gets underway in Nigeria as Senegal prepares for polls on Sunday. And the UN calls for more support for a newly signed peace deal in the Central African Republic. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. More than 40 leaders from the EU and Arab states converge in Egypt to talk trade and regional security. And in sports, South Africa targets the Cyprus Cup ahead of the 2019 World Cup. Well, let's start the hour in Sudan, where President El Bashir has declared a state of emergency for 1 year in the North African country. Bashir has also dissolved the federal government and sacked all state governors. Local media is reporting that the veteran leader has appointed members of the security forces as replacement governors. While addressing the nation from the presidential palace in Khartoum, he called on Parliament to postpone constitutional amendments that would allow him to run for another term in a presidential election in 2020. Bashir has been trying to quell demonstrations that have rocked the country since December.
I hereby declare the imposition of a state of emergency throughout the country for 1 year. Dissolution of the government of national accord, dissolution of state governments. We will continue to take the necessary measures and decisions to implement what we have mentioned.
Now, protests broke out in Sudan on December 19th after the government cut bread and fuel subsidies, causing prices to soar. Sudan was hoping the United States would lift its imposed sanctions in 2017. That embargo has blocked investment and financial aid into the country. Sudan has been rapidly expanding its money supply in an attempt to finance its budget deficit, and this has caused a spiraling inflation and a steep decline in the value of its currency. Well, let's move on to election news now. Let's start in Nigeria, where voting is currently underway. Nigerians are choosing a new president as well as some legislators after a week-long delay. There are 73 presidential hopefuls, but the two frontrunners are incumbent Muhammadu Buhari and former Vice President Atiku Abubakar. About 120,000 polling stations opened early Saturday, but some are yet to start the exercise of voting following delays in the distribution of voting materials. Some 84 million people are registered to vote. President Buhari, who cast his vote in the early hours of Saturday morning, has urged voters to maintain calm during the exercise.
At my constituency here, people are already lined up, so I will save time to go to the... Don't call me now, don't call me. Thank you very much. How do you feel about this exercise so far yourself? Well, so far so good. Calm down. So Nigerians understand that they are behaving themselves. Are you all full? Are you all full? What? The outcome of this exercise. Are you all full? Are you all full, sir? Very hopeful indeed.
But if you lose this election, will you accept defeat and congratulate the winner and hand over power eventually?
I will congratulate myself.
Meanwhile, just hours before the vote, explosions rocked the city of Maiduguri in the northeast of the country. According to locals, multiple blasts were heard at about 6 a.m. local time. There was no immediate indication of the cause, but the city has repeatedly been attacked by Boko Haram Islamists. More than 200 people have been killed this month alone. The Islamist militant group Boko Haram had vowed to disrupt the elections. The Electoral Commission, however, has assured voters of their safety, saying it has beefed up security across the country. Well, let's go live now to Nigeria for the very latest on these polls. We're joined by CGTN's Phil Ahaza in the nation's capital, Abuja, and Robert Nagila in the commercial capital of Lagos. Well, Phil, let's start with you. We know that voting is currently underway. How is that process unfolding in Abuja?
Oh, thank you, Lindy. Yes, indeed, one of the most significant highlights or things to take out of this process is that as we speak, quite a number of electorate voters have already cast their ballots across the country, which is quite remarkable because for the first time in Nigeria's voting history, the accreditation and voting proper are all merged by the electoral body INEC. So, I mean, when people come early in the morning, they queue up, they can go ahead and cast their vote a few hours after and they're back home. So unlike the previous elections where accreditation sometimes would take till afternoon and then they'll come back again to vote, the previous election, the INEC chairman stated that over 2 million people did not show up for that reason. But this time it's different. Things seem a bit calm and peaceful. The fact that the president has already cast his vote in Daura, Katsina State, as well as his major opponent, his challenger, Atiku Abubakar, in Adamawa State. But, so far the enthusiasm is really very high. You can see that voters are more aware of their rights as citizens to cast their ballots for whichever candidates they choose. However, there are a few concerns in the southern part of the country, like the southeast and the south-south, how that polling stations did not open on time, which is rather unfortunate with the fact that the Electoral Commission assured us several times of the fact that those logistics and operational issues have been taken care of. But we're hoping that all of those will be sorted and the voting process in those areas will go ahead smoothly as we've seen in these other parts of the country.
Well, absolutely. And on that note, Robert, let's come to you. We have heard some reports of delays in various voting stations in Lagos. What's happening there?
Well, Lindy, I'm at polling station 024, that is Victoria Island Junior Secondary School. Now, voting was supposed to have kicked off here at 8 o'clock local time this morning. However, this particular polling station was also being used as a distribution center of sorts. So you had at 8 o'clock, when the voting was supposed to have begun, voting material still being distributed to other polling centers. Now, at 9 o'clock, once that was done, when focus finally shifted to this particular polling station, it was then discovered by the staff here that they did not have any ink or rubber stamp. So somebody apparently went to look for that ink, and we now understand that in the last 5 or so minutes, voting has now finally begun at this polling station. However, that is 3 hours into the voting exercise, which means that you only have another 3 hours to go before this exercise is supposed to be complete. So there are some challenges. We've had a few more delays in other polling stations in and around Lagos and across the country, but nothing major at this particular moment. However, we expect that at some point during the day, the Electoral Commission will have to address some of these challenges. Lindy?
So, of course, it seems logistics still plaguing this election. The other concern, of course, has been security. Phil, let's come back to you on this one. We know that, of course, a blast rocked Maiduguri in the north of the country this morning, just hours before polls officially opened. What more can you tell us about this incident, and has there been any response from officials?
Well, thank you, Lindy. Yes, indeed, the country woke up to reports of blast and loud sounds of gunfire in the northern part of the country, northeast to be specific. That's Borno State and Yobe, which some critics say was to, scare voters away, from casting their ballots. But we've, however, heard from the police commissioner of Borno State, Damian Chukwu. He stated that these loud sounds of gunfire and all of that were more like a drill from the security forces, and he has assured voters to turn out in mass to cast their votes and not be scared. And we've actually seen online from some online polls that the situation in the northeast is fairly okay, because we have about 47% of polling stations opened and voters queuing up to cast their vote. So we just hope that things will be normal and the process will be smooth and fair.
And Robert, you mentioned, of course, that even though there's been a late start in some of those polling stations, they will be closing in a few hours. We understand that voting closes at 2 p.m. local time. Africa's most populous nation going to the polls in just 6 hours. As things stand, will everyone who wants to vote get the chance to cast their ballot?
Well, Lindy, the Electoral Commission had already indicated that as long as you're in the lines by the time it gets to 2 p.m. when the voting exercise is supposed to end, then you will be allowed to vote. It's only those who are not within the precincts, who are outside the compound and not in the line, that will not be allowed to vote. However, as you can imagine, having waited for 3 hours in some places like where we are, there are a lot of people that are already frustrated. You can hear there's a bit of voices being raised behind me. That's coming from the frustration. And a lot of people we've spoken to here are now asking, look, they delayed the election because they said that they were not completely ready. There were some logistical issues and other challenges. So they took an extra week to prepare for that. But still, things are not working as they should be. And people are now asking, what were they doing? But the Electoral Commission would probably come out and say, look, these are just small challenges that we expected to happen. However, at the end of the day, they believe that those who are in the line will be able to vote by the time that deadline has passed. Lindy?
Well, thank you so much. Robert Nagila live with us there in Lagos, and of course Phil Haza joining us from Abuja. Thanks very much to both of you. Let's head over now to elections in Senegal. The country is getting ready for its own presidential election. Voters are set to head to the polls on Sunday. Well, CGTN's Orkista Nyaboy has been following this story for us.
Election fever is at fever pitch in Senegal. On Sunday, an estimated 6 million Senegalese voters will choose a new president. 5 candidates are vying for the position. 57-year-old Macky Sall is a favorite. The current president came to power in 2012 and has undertaken an ambitious infrastructure development project. Under him, Senegal has begun constructing a new railway and a new futuristic city outside the capital. 59-year-old Idrissa Seck has run for president twice. He's been defeated both times and hopes to be third time lucky. A former prime minister, Seck was sacked and jailed briefly over alleged embezzlement. Ousmane Sonko is a newcomer to politics. At 44, he's also the youngest contender in the presidential race. He has made a name by denouncing corruption. Ousmane's age is seen as an advantage in a country where over 60% of voters are under 30. 63-year-old Issa Sall is an IT professor, while 65-year-old Madické Niang is the eldest candidate. 2 of Sall's rivals have been barred from running over allegations of corruption. Each of the 5 candidates is now making last-minute efforts to secure the seat. In order to win Sunday's presidential elections outright, a candidate will have to get over 50% of the votes. If none of them meets this threshold, then the top candidates will go into a runoff. Bulkisa Nyabo, CGTN in Dakar, Senegal.
And let's take a closer look at the candidates' final pitches.
Candidates across Senegal made their final pitches to voters. Incumbent President Macky Sall got some help with superstar singer Youssou N'Dour. Beyond entertainment, Sall plans to capitalize on the gains made through the plan for an emerging Senegal. Under the plan, Sall has led large infrastructural programs, such as the new city of Diamniadio, as well as an expansion of the country's roads, among other projects. The strategy looks to make Senegal an emerging economy by 2035. Beyond structural transformation, it also looks to implement social policies.
I will maintain the gains made with the emergent Senegal plan through universal healthcare. Women, I thank you. I will extend free C-section. For the unwell, we will continue to offer free dialysis. Care for children will be free. We will help families.
Sall is banking on Senegalese giving him a second term to further implement the plan.
I'm not going to say everything is good. There have been issues, but most of Macky Sall's tenure has been positive. We'll continue to support him so he can finish his work.
Elsewhere in the country, opposition candidates also took advantage of the last day of campaigning. Idrissa Seck, a longtime opposition politician and a former prime minister, looked to tap into youth frustrations. He made his final pitch to students at Dakar's main university, Université Cheikh Anta Diop.
When the young Korean, the young Japanese, the young Chinese, the young French or the young American benefits from a quality education, and that the young Senegalese, the young Ghanaian and the young African sees his study year disrupted, this is the proof and the explanation for the continent lagging behind.
C'est l'explication du retard du continent.
When it comes to galvanizing the youth population, Ousmane Sonko has gathered a substantial following. The 4-year-old is the youngest candidate. He is pushing for bold proposals, such as a gradual withdrawal from the CFA monetary zone, as well as renegotiating contracts for oil and gas made with multinational companies. Sonko has been galvanizing the youth vote with his message and the use of social media.
From what I'm seeing today and the number of people attending, if the traditional politicians cannot decipher the message, it means that they are understanding nothing, because this country's youth and all aspects of the nation have decided to take responsibility and to take their destiny into their own hands.
59 ans de mensonges et de trahison.
5 candidates are running on the presidential ballot, with Macky Sall projected as the winner. Astatal, CGTN.
Uganda's ruling party has endorsed President Yoweri Museveni as their candidate for the 2021 presidential election. The decision was taken by the party's executive during a retreat in western Uganda, but still needs a sign-off from party delegates at a conference. President Museveni would be fighting for a 6th term in office. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga has more.
Another election is coming, and the ruling party is already close to deciding its candidate. Members of the National Resistance Movement's Central Executive Committee have agreed President Yoweri Museveni's sole candidature.
All we want is our grip to power. We can't just give up power, just like that. And if we have a good person who is likable, who has brought this country thus far, why should we let him go?
But some party members are not happy with this move. They say there should be a more open approach on who the party's flag bearer will be. Mr. Museveni's candidacy still needs to be signed off by party delegates at a conference in November. He's been in power since 1986, having contested and won all 5 previous elections. Last year, lawmakers scrapped the presidential age limit of 75 years, which would have blocked him from running again. With less than 2 years to the presidential polls, political parties are already selecting their flag bearers, and there could be new contenders emerging. MP Robert Kyagulanyi, also known as musician Bobby Wine, has declared his intentions to run for the presidency. Other opposition parties say they are ready to compete as well.
To us in the opposition, we are prepared to encounter Museveni in whichever form he comes. And I can tell you that for now, we are more prepared than ever before. Whether they bring Museveni or not, the other preoccupation that we are going to be on as Ugandans and as members of the opposition is to ensure that we work on leveling the ground.
Uganda's opposition is pushing for electoral reforms ahead of the 2021 elections. They want an independent electoral commission constituted. But as the clock ticks down to 2021, political strategists are beginning to draw up plans to secure the public's votes. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala.
Well, let's take a short break now. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Reports of worsening hunger in South Sudan despite the peace deal. And South Africa's Land Reform Advisory Panel makes progress. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice. The United Nations has expressed concern over the food situation in South Sudan. The humanitarian body says the hunger situation has reached alarming levels despite the peace deal signed 6 months ago. It says nearly a fifth more people now need food aid to survive than when a famine was declared in 2017. The South Sudanese government and aid agencies are appealing for more support to avert a potential catastrophe.
In January 2019, an estimated 6.17 million people, or 54% of the population, were facing crisis, that is IPC phase 3, acute food insecurity or waste, out of which 1.3 million were in emergency IPC 4.
The findings of the IPC remain worrying. It's a concern that more and more people need humanitarian assistance, and the situation will worsen further with expected returnees. This food security situation is dire, mainly because of livelihoods have been compromised and assets depleted over time.
Meanwhile, humanitarian agencies operating in South Sudan say they are still being denied access to parts of the country and are charged fees when transporting aid to the needy. This despite parties to the peace deal signed last year aimed at ending the 5-year civil war, saying they are implementing the agreement. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
The United Nations says more than 6 million South Sudanese people are in need of humanitarian aid. However, aid agencies say they still face challenges in delivering it. They say they are often charged fees for doing so by national, state and local government.
It's an unnecessary expenditure. It's delaying our operation, and it should not take place. They are illegal, basically, most of those checkpoints. And this has to be stopped. But we also acknowledge that security is still an issue, and we're not saying checkpoints are bad per se if they deliver on the security, but they are not supposed to charge fees for humanitarian cargo.
South Sudan's government says it's now trying to coordinate with all levels of administration so that aid agencies can access all of the country.
We are implementing together the Presidential Order 29/2017, which is talking about unimpeded and unhindered humanitarian access that it should reach the people.
And South Sudan security organizations say they are also working to remove obstacles to delivery of assistance.
Our committee that has been formed comprises of the 3 institutions of the security organ, the Army and the National Security Service and the police will be continuously working. So it should not have a critical time that they will actually leave their work. They will continue working until we make sure that the roadblocks are not there.
Insecurity also remains a big challenge for aid agencies operating in South Sudan. Armed groups opposed to the peace deal remain in the country. Some, such as the National Salvation Front, don't always recognize permission given by the government to aid agencies to operate. And until that changes, humanitarian groups say some South Sudanese will remain without the aid they need. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
The outgoing United Nations representative to the Central African Republic is calling for support for another recently signed peace deal. In his last briefing to the UN Security Council before stepping down, Parfait Onanga Anyanga said the peace deal in the CAR is a turning point for the Great Lakes nation. CGTN's Laura Olubengo reports.
Earlier this month, different armed groups involved in the conflict in Central African Republic signed a peace agreement in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. A move welcomed across the board. The UN representative for CAR, however, says while a turning point for the country, a lot more support will be needed to ensure the deal holds.
L'accord du 6 février exprime clairement.
The February 6th Accord clearly expresses the will of Central Africans to renew their social contract, to reaffirm their profound aspiration for their coexistence in peace and in their rich diversity, to lower the tensions and to create conditions for rebuilding their country on healthy foundations. To create a country where re-emergence of violence as an instrument of conquest or preservation of power is banned forever.
The peace deal will see the establishment of a commission that will review justice issues. Members of the various armed groups will also be absorbed into a national army.
We require support of the Security Council to adopt MINUSCA's mandate because I don't want a parallel situation on the ground tomorrow. We want the work of these special units to fall under the authority of the government, but to also come under the direct and daily control of the MINUSCA, so that we don't have any unproductive incidents on the ground.
The Central African Republic needs now more than ever the help of the Security Council. Government leaders as well as the population await a strong signal for the implementation and support of the peace agreement. All the more so because a window of opportunity created by the signing of the agreement could quickly close because of the upcoming presidential and legislative elections of 2020 and 2021.
It is hoped that the latest efforts will end years of conflict that has reigned in the Central African Republic since 2012. Violence that has often taken a religious angle and seen many lose their lives and a quarter of the population displaced. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
South Africa's Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reform is beginning to make some headway on making proposals to fast-track land reform in the country. The panel is currently reviewing stumbling blocks in the process. It was appointed by President Cyril Ramaphosa in 2018, and the work of the panel is partly informed by a resolution of Parliament to consider expropriation of land without compensation. CGTN's Yuli Sanjamela has more.
The panel's mandate is to provide a unified policy perspective on land reform in respect of restitution, redistribution and tenure reform. The 10-member expert panel has its hands full with a looming deadline to submit a policy perspective to the presidency that will drive land reform in the country.
The program is specifically, focused on ensuring that we deal with the basis of land reform. And we take it from the historical perspective, which the minister shares with us, to land and justice. Our focus is on the political leadership, because we believe the issue of land reform in this country is bigger than all of us. And we find ourselves in a situation where if we do not collaborate, it is not going to work.
With a deadline of mid-March 2019 on the horizon, the panel held its second meeting to thresh out challenges and possible solutions to land reform. The advisory panel says land administration in this country is currently in crisis, and the landless are not only disadvantaged, but they're denied their constitutional rights. The panel also says current policies and the legal framework is inadequate and needs to be rationalized.
We need to have a common focus in terms of ensuring that land becomes the center of equality, the center of freedom, the center of productivity, the center of growth, the center of sustainability. To sit with the land administration machinery and systems that only afford the recordal of rights of a third of our population is not good.
Addressing the colloquium, Minister in the Presidency, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, emphasized that land is a key asset to drive development, the reform of which must address socio-economic issues in this country.
Land, as well as its accompanying flora and fauna and waters, are at the center of our collective growth and development as a nation. The fact that the land and agrarian reform is a prerequisite for our shared growth and development is thankfully no longer up to debate. It is a matter that even our peers and neighbors long recognized.
The colloquium is expected to conclude this weekend with an outlined way forward. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Let's take a short break. Your business news up next. Coming up, more than 40 leaders from the EU and Arab states converge in Egypt to talk trade and security. And Zimbabwe's central bank governor guilty of prejudice when exchanging exporters' US dollar earnings.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Right, let's start your business news in Egypt, where 24 presidents and prime ministers from the European Union, as well as members of the Arab League, have converged in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, for the first ever EU-Arab League summit. The summit will be chaired jointly by European Council President Donald Tusk and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. UK Prime Minister Theresa May will meanwhile hold bilateral meetings with European Union leaders at the summit. Arab and European leaders will seek to strengthen Arab-Euro ties and address a wide range of issues and common challenges, including migration, border security and trade between the two major blocs. The board of the Central Bank of Tunisia has raised its key interest rate by 100 basis points. This rate went up for the first time in March 2018 by 75 basis points, and then again in June from 5.75% to 6.75%. The central bank has also expressed a concern over the inflation outlook. CGTN's Adnan Chouachi has more.
The Central Bank of Tunisia has decided to raise its key interest rate by 100 basis points for the third time in a row, bringing it from 6.75% to 7.75%. The governor predicted a fall in the inflation rate to less than 7% at the end of 2019.
Without this action, the cost of inaction would have been very high. Inflation would have been even higher or even double-digit. The rise in inflation is pushing real interest rates even more into negative territory and causes a decrease in the real cost, which favors the acceleration of bank loans and consumer demand that can only exacerbate inflationary pressures.
Al-Abbasi stressed the independence of the central bank from the government, the finance ministry and parliament.
I had not consulted any government or professional party before raising key interest rates. It is a sovereign decision by the central bank's board. Our responsibility is to defend the purchasing power of the citizen by avoiding double-digit inflation rates.
The central bank's announcement has caused uproar in Tunisia. Consumer protection organizations have raised concern after the executive board of the bank made the decision to raise its key interest rate by 100 basis points. Experts pointed out that the increase in the key interest rate adds to the burden of companies and blocks investment and growth. It also depletes the already deteriorated purchasing power of citizens.
We're already surviving. The central bank has decided to condemn millions of Tunisians to poverty. Bank loans, mortgage, services and everything is more expensive. This is unacceptable.
Tunisian Premier Youssef Achad said his government respects the decisions of the Central Bank of Tunisia, which is an independent institution, but works at the same time to avoid any negative impact of the rise in the key interest rate on the recovery of the investment dynamic. Professional organizations and trade unions have rejected the central bank's decision, while the House of the People's Representatives gears up for a hearing session with the bank governor next Monday. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
South African mobile telecommunications giant MTN may once again find itself in hot water, this time over a possible bribe dating back 14 years. The case involves the awarding of a mobile operating license in Iran. An Iranian license was awarded to Turkcell in 2005, but the decision was reversed in MTN's favor. While MTN set up its network in Iran, Turkcell filed a $4.2 billion lawsuit. Sumitra Naidu has more.
A few days ago, the Hawks Special Investigating Unit arrested South Africa's former ambassador to Iran. Yusuf Saluji allegedly earned around $100,000 for facilitating a bribe to ensure MTN won the bid to set up a mobile network in Iran.
Let's assume that the South African courts end up ruling that MTN was indeed involved in corrupt activities, therefore it did not obtain the license rightfully. South Africa doesn't have any jurisdiction over Iran. So the Iranian government would take that into consideration and then decide, do they actually find merit in this? Do they want to conduct their own investigation? Or do they just leave it as is?
MTN just settled a hefty $53 million fine with Nigeria in January this year for transferring money out of the country without the central bank's knowledge. Nigeria is MTN's most profitable country in Africa, while Iran has grown into MTN's second biggest market. It has a 49% stake in Irancell with over 43 million subscribers.
In Iran, MTN isn't seen like how it is seen at times in Nigeria, as a company that is abusive of tax regulations and is looking for loopholes. It's actually well regarded. And also in this current sanctions atmosphere, it's very unlikely that Iran's going to kick out one of its key investors.
President Cyril Ramaphosa was the chair of MTN's board at the time of the alleged bribe. His role is also being brought into question.
The task of the board is to provide a strategic direction for a company and assist with formulating future overarching strategy. So I think it will be very difficult for President Ramaphosa to be held accountable for what was happening with MTN in Iran at the time, just because he was probably too removed from the actual events that were taking place.
The case is still being investigated and it's not yet clear if there was any wrongdoing by MTN. The Johannesburg-based mobile operator has repeatedly refuted claims of underhandedness in obtaining its operating license in Iran. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Uganda's plan to start a national airline carrier could be realized sooner than expected. The local transport ministry has confirmed that test flights for the new aircrafts are underway at the Bombardier facility in Montreal, Canada. The country has also sent 8 pilots to Bombardier for training ahead of the comeback of Uganda Airlines. CGTN's Michael Baleke has more.
The first aircraft of the revived Uganda Airlines is expected to arrive in the country in just weeks. 4 Bombardier Sierra J900 series will form the core of the national carrier's regional fleet.
We rely on Kenya Airways and others. So that money we are giving away is going to be saved. Number 2, in regard to employment, our own people are going to be employed.
According to the Ugandan government, the national airline, which is fondly remembered as the Flying Crane, will start flights to Nairobi, followed by Kigali, Johannesburg, and Juba. There are also plans to open up additional routes to Mombasa, Khartoum, Mogadishu, and Kinshasa, among others. Uganda has not had an airline for the last 18 years after the national carrier was liquidated in 2001, and there are fears that the revived Uganda Airlines may immediately join a list of African carriers struggling to break even. A recent report by the International Air Transport Association suggests that punitive taxes, high infrastructure and fuel costs are curtailing the benefits of air transport on the African continent.
We have seen Etihad closing its routes to Uganda because they are not commercially viable. We have seen British Airways closing because the routes are not commercially viable. Key airlines, KQ, Kenya Airlines, it is struggling with massive government bailouts.
This week, South African Airways announced a restructuring plan to save the airline from sinking in debt. But Ugandan authorities argue the national airline will be supported through a public-private partnership, and the revival of Uganda Airlines will significantly boost Uganda's trade in the global market and facilitate travel and tourism. Mike Kobaleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And on to South Africa now, where authorities are hoping Cape Town's reputation as a global business destination will be strengthened with the expansion of the Cape Town International Convention Centre. Currently, the size of the facility hampers its ability to host multiple events simultaneously. CGTN's Travis Andrews has this report.
For more than 16 years, the Cape Town International Convention Centre has been a massive boon for the local economy and has held over 7,000 events since it's opened its doors. Now, the completion of the facility's expansion program is set to further boost its attempts to position itself as the world's best long-haul international convention centre by 2020. The convention centre hosts a number of large-scale events throughout the year, including the annual mining in Durban, which alone contributed over $45 million to the local economy.
Last year, Cape Town was awarded with the Events Capital Award, and so therefore it's important for us to continue positioning Cape Town as a destination of choice for travel and trade. And conferencing is a big part of our city's economy, and so in the last few years, some of the signature events that our city hosted contributed 3 to 6 billion rand to our regional economy.
That income is derived from what delegates spend on hotels, restaurants and tours, and the future expansion of Cape Town's airport is likely to see an influx of even more bookings.
With the upgrading of the Cape Town International Airport, we expect to bring in many more direct flights because, again, it's about the ease of travel. And so with a new runway, which is going to be 3.5 kilometers long, it will be able to accommodate for A380 aircraft. Those are the type of infrastructure that you need to grow the demand, and that makes business sense.
For many years now, the facility has been forced to turn down some conference requests over lack of space, which ultimately led to a loss in revenue, but that is likely to change. The convention center's expansion came at a cost of over $50 million and has 2 new connecting sky bridges, which will enable it to host concurrent events simultaneously. Local stakeholders believe tapping into the burgeoning Asian market will be key in establishing the mother city as the best long-haul conference destination in the future.
What we're seeing is a definite trend of a slower growth out of what we call our traditional European markets and fast growth out of Asia and the Middle East. So in terms of China, we're going on the SAT China Roadshow where we engage with operators in market. We've got 4 bid presentations in China to land big conferences, and then we're continuously looking at different ways of marketing there.
And the China Premium Taxi is just one event which showed just how much growth potential the Chinese conferencing market may possess. It will be key in exploring as the Cape Town International Convention Centre repositions itself for the next 20 years of growth and economic development. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
And that is where we leave your business news, but here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, the seal from Antarctica that's causing a stir in South Africa.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa's biggest film festival, FESPACO, is marking its 50th anniversary. The French acronym translates to the Pan-African Film and Television Festival of Ouagadougou. It provides an opportunity for African movie and TV professionals to network and pitch their projects to clients across the globe. A common complaint is that African productions lack financial muscle to give films star power. This year's event will screen 165 films over a week. FESPACO takes place in the Burkina capital every 2 years, but is overshadowed by security problems in the host country. Authorities have stepped up security ahead of the opening on Saturday.
All the merchants who will be all along here, we must be able to security check them and know if they are not strangers who have given them things to bring in, bags or others. All those who are all along here. We have the usual security measures that we are reinforcing for FESPACO. It is quite normal. We want to reassure festival goers that they can come to Ouagadougou to eat at any time, to move around at any time without problem.
And to South Africa, where a southern elephant seal thought to be from Antarctica crossed more than 6,500 kilometers of sea and made Fish Hook Beach in Cape Town its temporary home. Many are descending onto the beach to have a closer look at the Antarctic creature. Here's CGTN's Travis Andrews with more.
The summer season is in full swing, and this Antarctic visitor seems to be taking full advantage of it. For this southern elephant seal, even the Cape's warm waters must seem like bliss. The animal has made a nesting area for itself on Fish Hook Beach, which is popular with locals and tourists, and many are descending on it to get a closer look at the rare creature. It's not the first time that this seal, known as Buffle, has visited these shores though, and is known to scientists who have tagged it before. Even so, its annual trip has sparked the curiosity of the masses.
It's not very often that the elephant seals come to South Africa. They're very rare in South Africa. Well, I mean, as I've heard, this one's basically been in the Cape Town area since 2014, but he's been showing up at various beaches, like unpredictably. Last season he was at Dacre Island for about 3 months. But still, it's a very rare animal in South Africa, so it's a very valuable opportunity to get, if you're into wildlife, if you're into animals, to come and see this seal. He's quite special. It's quite great, yeah.
Buffle is currently molting and will replenish his fur in around a month. Until then, he'll spend most of his time on the beach, with the occasional dash off to cool off in the water. Some curious onlookers have also gotten a tad too close between Buffle and the sea, and he's made that abundantly clear. Even so, it's not every day an animal usually seen in science books ends up at the local beach. Cape Townians are quite used to seals. There's a large Cape fur seal colony just down this beach, but when it's a visitor from Antarctica, it's another story altogether.
I have not seen this before in 60 years, so it's a first for us and very special to see nature in this way. And I'm particularly interested to see how his skin is actually molting and coming off. A couple of days ago it was just a little bit around his nose, and now it's a whole lot more.
It's really the first time that I've seen this thing on the beach. I just read the sheet now, what it's about. It's busy shedding its skin, and it will be staying on the beach for maybe 3 to 4 weeks, and people must just give it space so that nature can take its course.
So the spectator and educational values of the seal's visit are quite high, and for the moment Buffle will continue to molt until it departs on its long journey back home. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Coming up in your sports news, up next. South Africa targets the Cyprus Cup ahead of the 2019 World Cup.
Africa, where champions are made, records